Welcome to History 111, Lecture 27, Industrial Society. The period between 1820 and 1840 is one of rapid expansion in American business, and a lot of it's because they're relying more and more on the corporate structure. And the corporate structure provides for limited liability. Individual stockholders risk only losing the value of their own investments if the corporations fail. You buy stock, and whatever the price you pay for it is all you risk. You're not liable for the corporation's larger losses. And so that allows more people to invest. Now, as a result of this, the industrial Northeast really grows. It had originally been all about textile industries, but by 1830s, northern factories are producing a wide range of goods. Clocks, shoes, just about guns, just about anything you can imagine is now being built and made there. The Old Northwest, by contrast, experienced steady industrial growth, but mainly relied on agriculture. Wheat is the big staple crop here, and most of the industrial activities of this region really are concerned with agriculture in some way. Chicago becomes the great metropolis and becomes the national center for agricultural machinery and the meatpacking industry. Now, rising world farm prices are going to encourage Western farmers to engage in commercial agriculture and concentrate on growing one crop for market, and the growth of factories in the North are really going to provide big boost to agriculture, and that's going to form and cement a strong economic relationship between the West and the North. There's also some new agricultural techniques that really help boost that up. Cyrus McCormick, for example, is going to invent the automatic reaper and reduce the number of men needed to harvest. The thresher comes along in 1840, and John Deere is going to establish a factory to manufacture steel plows. And those are definitely some names that we're still familiar with today. Now, the industrialization is going to mean that large numbers of people who had once earned their living as farmers or artisans are going to be dependent on wages paid by factory owners, and workers experience a lot of common problems, such as low pay, long hours, and unsafe working conditions. A lot of the labor at this point relies on immigrants, and there's various advantages to the factory owners for doing this. First and foremost, there's vast numbers of immigrants coming into the country at this time, so there's always people willing to work cheaply and for long and hard hours. So for example, if you had workers who quit or became injured or could no longer work, it was easy to replace them. And if you didn't want to pay high wages, there was always someone willing to do this. And what that means is the immigrants are often being forced to do the hardest labor and work in the harshest conditions. And conditions are going to get progressively worse during this time period, although they're still going to be better than England. There are some attempts at alternative models like the Lowell Mills, where they try to employ young unmarried women and pay them generous wages with good living conditions. But the whole Lowell system is unable to keep up because market competition is going to make it very difficult to maintain wages, and ultimately immigrants offer cheap labor alternatives, and the factories are forced to abandon that system or risk going out of business. Now, urban workers are going to respond to these conditions in different cities by organizing unions and local political parties as an attempt to protect their interests. Importantly, Supreme Court rules in Commonwealth v. Hunt that peaceful unions have the right to negotiate labor contracts with employers. Improvements for workers then continue to be limited, though, in the 1840s and 1850s because there's periodic depressions. Employers and courts are generally hostile to unions, and there's simply an abundant supply of cheap immigrant labor. So if your workers unionized, as a factory owner, it was sometimes cheaper just to fire everybody and hire new people. Now, this time there's also a trend towards increased wealth inequality. In other words, the rich are getting richer, and by 1860, 5% of families control 50% of the U.S. wealth, whereas large numbers of urban poor, or homeless paupers as they're known. For African Americans, they are living in poverty. They are free, but certainly not equal in the North, and have limited economic opportunities, and are generally the poorest of the poor. Despite the wealth inequality, there are significant opportunities to move up for the working class. In particular, the working class could save money and move to the uncultivated West. And that's going to help limit the distress of the working class and help keep tensions from boiling over by providing an alternative, an option that people can take. Now, for the middle class, they're going to be rapidly expanding, and they're the fastest growing group in America, and they're going to become really influential on the culture of urban society. Now, one more thing we should note is home ownership has a very distinct pattern. First of all, the wealthy and the middle class are going to tend to own homes, whereas workers and artisans are going to become increasingly renters, and there's going to be an increasing divide in the quality of housing for those who own and those who rent. For women at this time, the cult of domesticity, as is known, becomes particularly important. This is a time when female education is limited, and new roles for women in the middle class society really begin to become oriented towards becoming the guardian of what they call domestic virtues. That is, be a good mother and a wife. Be less of a producer and more of a consumer. And I start talking about women's separate sphere. This idea that women begin to develop distinctive female culture, including associations, clubs, and literature. That is a public type of a life for women that's exclusive to women, and they were supposed to stay out of men's things like work, politics, and so on. So it's really enforcing a system of gender bias within society. Now, the working class women, though, on the other hand, they can't afford to stay home and work in poor conditions and are somewhat left out of that middle class movement as a result. A number of leisure activities become very common in urban society at this point. Minstrel shows were one example, and those are white actors in blackface performing racist caricatures of African Americans. There was also public sporting events that were very popular, and things like P.T. Barnum's American Museum, which to use the language of the time was a freak show, are also frequented by a number of people. But far and away, the most common form of entertainment was Shakespeare. So what's the big idea here? Well, industrial society is really being driven by cheap labor, and there's an increasing economic divide with the rich getting richer and the middle class growing. But for the working class, really their only option is to save money and go west and try to strike out as a farmer. Now for the middle and upper classes, they're left, however, to enjoy the true benefits of urban society. There's lots of culture, there's lots of entertainment, and there's lots of other things available to them, and they're able to reap those benefits. See you in the next lecture.